Hello. So Mavuika came out about a week ago, and I have a lot of things to say about this character. I've seen a lot of people complain that you need both Xilonen and Citlali to make her good, and that she was garbage if you don't have her best teammates. And I simply think that's not the case. But after watching a lot of guides, I also think there's not a lot of videos that focus on her budget teams and how to optimize her damage in those teams. So I tested all of the budget teams I could think of, and I've had quite a few good surprises, and discovered a few interesting mechanics. So we'll talk about all of that in this video. But before talking about the teams, we need to talk about a few tricks and combos you can use to optimize her performance in any team. First, let's talk about exploration. Mavuika is undeniably one of the best exploration characters, even outside of Natlan, but there's two tricks you can use to make it even better. Firstly, you can travel more distance in her bike form by repeatedly starting and cancelling her flight mode, which is often referred to as bunny hopping. To do this, quickly double tap the jump button to start gliding, and tap jump one more time when you see the flames going out, and then you just repeat this over and over until you run out of fuel. And if you add just a single other character in your team that has an exploration skill, you can make an infinite loop of movement skills, allowing you to effortlessly soar through the entirety of Tevat. The second movement trick is for climbing. Normally, Mavuika climbs for like 2 seconds, and then drops her bike in the middle of the wall, which is a bit underwhelming. But you can fix this by simply doing a backflip. I am not joking. To do this, simply hold forward to climb on the wall, and just before you reach the peak of her climb, quickly release forward to press backwards, tap jump, and start holding forward again. And now, climbing walls has become a trivial task too. Alright, now that we know how to optimize her exploration skills, let's talk about combat optimizations. You might have heard people say that her best combo is just tapping burst and holding charge attack until your burst runs out. But there's a few improvements we can do, and there's basically just 3 combos you need to know about: the vape combo, the solo cryo combo, and the double cryo combo. In vape teams, if you just hold your charge attack the whole time, you're going to hit the enemy 8 times during your burst rotation, and 4 of those hits are going to vaporize. But we can do better than that. If you dash cancel just after your second charge attack hits and repeat that for the whole rotation, you can squeeze in a 9th charge attack that is also going to vape, and on top of that you get 4 dashes worth of extra damage, which leads to about a 25% damage increase. But more importantly, this combo makes Mavuika compatible with characters like Xingqiu and Yelan, because for some reason, initiating Mavuika's charged attack triggers their coordinated attack, and since we initiate a charged attack 5 times in the rotation, we can consistently vape all of our reactable hits with either Xingqiu or Yelan in the team, which is going to be very useful to know for the budget teams. Also, I'm calling this the vape combo, but you can also use it in overload and monopyro teams, and it will still be an upgrade compared to just holding charge attack. Now let's talk about melt teams. In melt teams with a single cryo applicator, if you just hold your charge attack without thinking, you will only get 2 melts, and sometimes you might even apply pyro too early and not get a single melt. To fix this, you just need to do 2 things. Firstly, after hitting your burst, you can wait a split second before holding your charge attack to give enough time for your cryo unit to reapply cryo. And then, after hitting your 4th charge attack, simply jump in place before holding charge attack again, once again to give enough time for your cryo unit to reapply cryo. And with this combo, you will consistently get 4 melts instead of 2, which is a pretty big improvement. Alternatively, you can also release your attack button after the 3rd charge attack hits to do a final hit at the end, and if you chain 2 of those, you will also get 4 melts. And finally, if you're playing a double cryo team, you should have enough cryo application to make a 5 melts combo. To do this, simply do 2 charge attacks, dash cancel, 3 charge attacks, dash cancel again, and finish off with 4 more charge attacks. And this way you should be able to get 5 melts. Alright, that's about all you need to know for the combos, so now let's move on to the teams. During the whole video, I will be using the following build. I have 98% crit rate with 193 crit damage. My talents are level 8 and 8 because that's the maximum we can currently get. And throughout the video, I will be using 4 different weapons. The Melusine Sword, which is a decent attack stick. The Mailed Flower, which is better in reaction teams, but the passive is a little bit annoying to trigger and you might have to tinker your rotations around to make it work. The Rain Slasher, which is really good in vaporized teams. And I will also be trying the Sacrificial Sword, which has a very interesting interaction with Mavuika's kit. Alright, now that the build is set, we can finally move on to the teams. Firstly, I wanted to briefly mention the teams with Xilonen and Citlali, and the team you're seeing on screen is probably the team you've heard the most about, because it's her best in slot team. However, while this team is very good and very comfortable to play, I think it's a bit overhyped. And what I mean by that is that you can get pretty similar potential with either Xilonen or Citlali. You don't really need both of them in the same team. For example, if you only have Xilonen, you can make a vaporized team with Farina and it's still going to clear almost as fast. And the same thing goes for Citlali. You can just replace Xilonen with another support like Sucrose for example, and you will still deal about as much damage. You're not always going to get 200 fighting spirit, but it doesn't really matter. Citlali and Mavuika should already be able to get around 170 fighting spirit by themselves, so you're not missing out on that much. And talking about Citlali teams, this double cryo team with C6 Diona as a support ended up getting higher nuke damage potential than the team with Xilonen, and I almost killed this big guy in one rotation, which is pretty crazy. And also, I tried to play a plunge team. It was pretty bad, but it's funny. Anyway, now that this is out of the way, let's jump to the main topic of this video, the budget teams. And the first budget team you've probably seen people recommend is a melt team with Rosaria and Kachina. And personally, I really did not like this team. Yes, this team has a good damage potential, but a lot of things can go wrong, which led to the team feeling a bit clunky to play. And personally, I much preferred playing vaporized teams with either Yelan or Xingqiu. The damage ceiling is probably a bit lower, but it feels a lot more comfortable to play, and there's a lot less things that can go wrong. Another team you've also probably heard about is an overload team with Bennett, Auroron and Chevreuse. And despite both my Auroron and my Chevreuse being at low constellation levels, this team was still pretty good, as well as being very easy to play, and the rotation was very smooth. But there's another Auroron team I ended up liking even more, and that's replacing Chevreuse with Xingqiu to make an overvape team. Xingqiu does require you to make a little longer rotation because of the cooldown on his E, but in counterpart he's going to allow you to vaporize your charge attacks and your burst, so it completely makes up for it. And since you need to wait a little bit for Xingqiu's E to come off cooldown anyway, you can stay for a few normal attacks on Mavuika after your burst before moving on to the next rotation, which can help with finishing off enemies that have a little bit of health left, which is more annoying to do on melt teams. Also, as an alternative, if you don't have Auroron, you can replace him with either Kachina or Pyro Traveler. Personally, I prefer Pyro Traveler, and it will deal a little bit less damage, but honestly, it was still pretty good. And also, I do want to mention that if you have her, Kokomi is also a pretty good Hydro applicator for Mavuika. She doesn't really deal damage by herself, but she can hold TTDS to further buff Mavuika, and her Hydro application is AoE, which can feel better than Xingqiu and especially Yelan when you're fighting a group of enemies. And also, do keep in mind that I'm showing a lot of teams with Xingqiu, but most of the time you can replace him with either Yelan or Farina, which is going to end up in more damage, although with sometimes a few caveats. Now, that's cool and all, but all of these teams have one thing in common, which is that every single one of them used Bennett. And what if you really don't want to play Bennett, or you want to keep him for the other side of the abyss? Well, you still have a few options. Firstly, I tried a double Hydra team with Yelan, Xingqiu and Auroron, with Mavuika doing normal attacks. And Mavuika is definitely not the star of this team, but the good thing with having 4 characters dealing damage simultaneously is that you don't need your carry to deal as much damage as when you're playing hyper carry teams. So it doesn't really put Mavuika to the spotlight, but it's a team that ended up clearing pretty well, and because of that I just had to include it. Then I also tried a national team with the Pyro Traveler replacing Bennett. And I'm gonna be honest, it definitely feels like a downgrade compared to the Bennett teams, but it was still able to clear decently well. But there's one Bennettless team that really surprised me, and that's the Overload team with Xilonen replacing Bennett. And the cool thing with Mavuika is that because she includes a lot of dashes in her combo without consuming any stamina, you can really rotate around the enemy very fast, allowing Xilonen to deal more damage with her pyronado. And on top of that, this team has massive AoE damage, and you're not stuck in a circle because of Bennett. So really, I definitely prefer this team to the one with Bennett. Oh, and if someone knows why my pyronado changed directions, I would be happy to know. But after all of that, there is one more thing I wanted to try. What if we tried to play a team with absolutely no Natlan characters outside of Mavuika? No Aurora, no Kachina, no Pyro Traveler. Now the problem is that there's a pretty big difference between doing a rotation at 100 Fighting Spirit and doing a rotation at 180. But that's what I remembered about the Sacrificial Greatsword. With this weapon we get another skill cast which allows us to get a total of 170 Fighting Spirit with Mavuika alone, which means that we can play teams without any other netline characters, like this double cryo team with Bennett for example. And it genuinely ended up being very comparable to the other 4-star teams with characters like Auroron. I also tried a good old national team with Bennett, Xingqiu and Sucrose, basically playing Mavuika as the pyronado herself, and it was nothing outstanding, but it also ended up clearing pretty well. I also tried a mono pyro team with Bennett, Xilonen and Kazuha, and I was very surprised by how fast it cleared. It has a ton of AoE, it's really easy to play, Mavuika is generating a ton of particles for Xilonen, it works very well. And out of curiosity, since I've seen a lot of people compare Mavuika with Arlecchino, I wanted to see how much of a difference there was in the clear time between this budget Mavuika team and the same teammates with Arlecchino instead. Both my Mavuika and my Arlecchino are at similar levels of investment, and even in a budget team with a freaking Sacrificial Greatsword, Mavuika ended up clearing faster than my Arlecchino. Now, this probably also has to do with the fact that I'm kind of forced to use White Tassel and Arlecchino because I literally don't have any better weapon. But still, being able to compete with Arlecchino in a very budget team is pretty good. Now, I do want to say two things about the Sacrificial Greatsword teams. In my case, Sacrificial Greatsword ended up being a viable option because my only alternatives are 4-star weapons like Rain Slasher and Mailed Flower. But if you have any better weapons for her, you're probably better off keeping that one and adding a Natlan character to your team. Or if you really don't want to, you can also squeeze in a few normal attacks in your rotation to get to 100 Fighting Spirit. And also, Sacrificial Greatsword only has an 80% chance of triggering at R5, but there's actually a little thing you can do to prevent this from being too harmful. If it doesn't activate when you use your skill, you can dash twice to consume most of the Night Soul and then cancel her bike form to let her skill deal damage to the enemy, and this also has a chance to trigger the Sacrificial Greatsword, allowing you to just waste 2 or 3 seconds and continue your rotation like nothing happened. Okay, that's about all I had to say for the carry teams, but before talking about my final thoughts, I wanted to talk about her sub-DPS teams. First, I tried her in Mualani teams, and unsurprisingly, it works like wonders. No need to worry about building 4 billion energy recharge on Xilonen anymore, you just tap E and you're good to go, and you even get a damage buff from the burst. I also tried to play it kind of as a dual carry team by infusing Kazuha's burst with Hydro every other rotation to nuke enemies with Mavuika's burst, and it's probably less optimal than just playing Mualani hyper carry, but it was pretty fun. Mavuika also ended up being a really good Xilonen replacement in Navia teams. Her skill applies enough pyro for Navia to get her stacks, and you can even squeeze in her burst between 2 Navia E's for a big burst of damage plus the damage buff it gives, without really making your rotation any longer. And I should be doing even more damage here with my Navia, but unfortunately this boss has a 50% geo resistance. I also tried her with Novelette, and honestly, Farina is probably still stronger here, but if you don't have Farina or want to use her in another team, Mavuika works perfectly fine here. You can just play her as a skill bot, and you can also try to do some goofy pyro-infused Kazuha burst setups and stuff. I don't really know if it's optimal, but it was fun. Then I of course had to try her as a support for Chaska teams. And while you would probably deal more damage by staying on Mavuika and never switching back to Chaska, the team still feels very fun to play, and she's definitely an upgrade to Xiongling here. I also tried her as a trigger in Burgeon teams, and it kinda works. She does apply a lot of pyro for a Burgeon trigger, so you might need a lot of Hydro to balance it out, but if you have that, she works pretty well, and in this Kokomi Farina team, she did feel more comfortable to use than Lithoma. And finally, I would have liked to try her with characters like Kinich, Emily, Tartaglia, or cryo DPSs like Ganyu and Risley, but unfortunately, I don't have any of those characters, so I had to resort to some, questionable stuff. Anyway, that's basically all I wanted to say about her teams. Overall, Mavuika is a formidable exploration unit, and I was very satisfied with her performance, even in budget teams. Now, I do have to say that yes, the damage difference between her teams with Citlali or Xilonen and her budget teams without either of them was definitely very noticeable. But firstly, that's the case of a lot of characters, like Xiao for example. But most importantly, it's not really that her budget teams are bad, it's rather that her optimal teams are absurdly strong. I still can't believe that I almost killed a floor 12 Abyss boss in one rotation with a C0 Mavuika using a 4-star energy recharge weapon with a crit rate circlet, overcapping on crit by 12% with talents at level 8. I should not be able to do that at this level of investment. So yeah, if I had to give any complaints about Mavuika, it's that I don't think we really needed another pyro DPS. I think it would have been more interesting for her to be more of a supportive character. Like, I don't know, maybe something like a Pyro Farina or Pyro Yelan or maybe even Kokomi. I think a team-wide Pyro healer with buffing abilities would be really cool. So yeah, she could have been the 5-star Pyro support we're still waiting for, but instead she ended up becoming yet another Pyro DPS, which I think is a little bit sad. But it is how it is, and overall I'm still very satisfied with her. Anyway, that was it for this video, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye!